Welcome to the third meta report for Path of Exile 3.22, Trial of the Ancestors. Today, we're going to be focusing on two very important things. The first is passive skill tree tattoos and how they've changed the build making process. The second of which is a special unique item that's also completely revolutionized how players make builds. So for example, normally your travel nodes would be considered very low value. Sure, you have to pass through dex, int, strength, whatever, to get to the other things you actually want. But those travel nodes are very low value in and of themselves. They're only mildly exciting if you're an attribute stacker. On a strength stacker, yeah, pathing through strength is good. On a dex stacker, pathing through dex is good. And maybe sometimes that helps to cap your accuracy, you're using crystallized omniscience, all that sort of stuff. There are very niche uses for it. Outside of those niche uses, you wanted to avoid them as much as possible. With the new passive skill tree tattoos, you don't necessarily want to go out of your way to take extras, with a few exceptions, but they certainly don't feel as bad as they once did. And certain builds specialize their passive skill tree around these unique effects. So let's dive into it with a couple examples. First up we have good old Tornado Shot. Yeah, Tornado Shot Deadeye, the build that you thought you knew. But you'll notice something's missing here. There's no crystallized omniscience. Now, in the past, crystallized omniscience was the hallmark of a finished Tornado Shot build. But now we see people with Mage Blood, people with Headhunter, all these super expensive items relative to Omni itself, not using one. And that is due to the effect of passive skill tattoos. Because who needs Omniscience to add a ton of penetration and carry your damage, if instead you tattoo all that away, get a ton of proj speed, and get multiple projectiles due to the Warrior's Tail. This increases the effect of tattoos in radius, so if you put something like a projectile tattoo, which we should be able to see when we come over to Path of Building here, that's going to be pretty neat. And it means that if you've ever wanted to play Tornado Shot, but been too poor to, you can now make the most budget Tornado Shot setups ever. Are they as good as the multi-mirror versions? Well, no, the multi-mirror versions are good for a reason. They're still pretty darn okay, and you'll have a good time because you get extra projectiles. First up, on a tattoo of a Berserker, Onslaught on hit, it's being allocated. I'd certainly give up an anointment for that. Next up, projectile speed, the Ramako Sniper, wherever possible here. And we've got this. Skills fire an additional projectile, at least so long as you have 7 adjacent passive skills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1 wasted point, but it's absolutely worth it. I mean, imagine 1 point for +1 proj, sign me up. Oh, wait a minute. This is Warrior's Tail. Sorry, that's +2 proj, which is exactly why this combo is so powerful. And the other option is right here. You get another projectile. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No wasted points this time. All the dex becomes proj speed. You just make up for the accuracy elsewhere. You could get rid of int if you don't need it. Maybe turn it into something else, but I bet we're right at the int cap. Oh, nope. You could even tattoo over this. Get some extra chaos res. Help yourself cap. And this is really cool. It's absolutely revolutionized the way people put together their Tornado Shot builds. And this is just so much more accessible than what we've seen in the past. Because this is about 746k DPS per projectile, before all the configs are checked. And in the past, you never, ever would have had that, because you simply didn't have enough projectiles. Sure, you get 1 from your quiver, you get 1 from your bow, you don't need GMP anymore. All right. Oh, sorry. In this case, they don't even have 1 on their bow, but having 1 on your bow isn't unrealistic. Only the super high-end ones tend to have 2 because +2 is much more expensive and difficult to fracture. So typical +2 here. Then from your skill tree, you'd get another +2 with Master Fletcher and Multi-Shot. That's 4, so you've matched GMP. And another 2, Endless Munitions. Then +3 from tattoos, which again has completely revolutionized how you build it. The +3 is about 50% more damage, which means you don't need crystallized omniscience, opening up an era of budget Tornado Shot. I have no idea if budget Tornado Shot is something that will survive into Path of Exile 3.23, so if you've ever wanted to play budget Tornado Shot or just Tornado Shot and you couldn't afford it, now's the time to do so, and most of these items are surprisingly affordable. The bow is definitely on the more expensive end, as it's going to be, but even that, it's not nearly the mirror tier behemoth that was needed in the past. But you might be saying, okay, aren't the tattoos super expensive? I mean, some of them, yes. You're going to pay 12 divines per +1 projectile tattoo. That part is expensive, but is also kind of unavoidable. And it's a lot cheaper to do that than to buy the Crystallized Omniscience and also all of the gear to go with Crystallized Omniscience. I'm not saying that this is a super, super budget setup. After all, it is still Tornado Shot, but for the price of just the Omni itself, you can get your tattoos, and as for the rest of the gear, I mean, it's not bad. None of this gear is by any means bad, but it's not super, super high-end either. Okay, maybe the quiver is. The quiver's pretty darn nice. And of course, you want life regen to power your calm spirit. That's also why we see the False Vision, and the Hira's Truth is just a super good budget option. Culling Strike is 10% more damage, 50% global crit multi is, well, 50% global crit multi. It's surprisingly difficult to make an amulet below like 10, 20 divines that significantly outperforms a Hira's Truth. Now, coming back into PoB for a moment, there's another section that I wanted to highlight, which is right up here. This jewel socket can also support a warrior's tail. And the interesting thing about the jewel socket up here is it can support double tattoos. So we've got one here. You can do curse effect, and one here, which you can also do curse effect. As soon as I find it on the list, of course. Oh, there we go. Curse effect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 potential connections, which also means, I forget where it is in here, but there's a tattoo that gives 2% all res if you have 8 passives instead of the 7 passives allocated. This is one of the few spots on the tree that can support this and also support a warrior's tail, making it super valuable because this would be 16% curse effect and 4% max res. Very, very powerful. Or of course, 32% curse effect, which if you're using multiple curses is pretty darn big. So these are the sorts of thinking with portals that you have to keep in mind when you're involving skill tattoos. And of course, you'd then want to tattoo over all the small nodes as well, get even more additional bonuses. Normally, travel nodes are considered low value. These are no longer low value. Anything within Warrior's Tail, absolutely high value, and you should seek to tattoo it as much as possible. Something like this, you can even do that. Get a few more attributes. The 10 int turns into 8 int, 8 strength, 8 dex. That might help you meet some other attribute requirements, loosen things up on gear just a little bit. Alternatively, override an int node with, some resistances. You don't really want a loyalty tattoo here. Don't need one of those. Reduced effective curses is always nice. Skill effect duration. Maybe add some flat damage. I mean, we're Tornado Shot. Tornado Shot likes damage. There you go. Add some flat damage. Just try to get as much value as possible. Realistically, it's probably even worth it to grab this node and tattoo that as well. Aside of that, we're just converting dex over to proj speed because Tornado Shot values proj speed. So again, really cool tech and something that I absolutely love about the current league. It changes your build up in a way that I don't think Crucible quite did. Now in Crucible, there were a few builds that you could use that built exclusively around the Crucible tree. But if you weren't doing that, then it didn't have nearly as much of an effect as something like this does. It's, again, really cool to see a build like Tornado Shot that before wasn't really seen as viable without the Omniscience. I'm sure to one level or another it was viable even without the Omni, but it was definitely a lot weaker, and now the two versions are absolutely on par. In fact, I'd say this version, especially as a budget option if you don't have multiple mirrors of gear, is straight up stronger. And if you want to know more about how to build this kind of Tornado Shot, I believe Crouching Tuna just did a video. I'll try to find it and try to remember to link it down below, but no promises because I'm really bad about that stuff. What if you took this to its logical extreme and got rid of all of your travel nodes entirely? turning your build into something that no longer needs attributes. Well, then you'd have something like this Poison SRS setup. You'll notice we've got pretty standard gear with a Surrender, a Severed in Sleep, a Covenant. Looks normal if you're looking over here. But it doesn't look so normal if you're looking here. Wait a minute. 105 Strength, 75 Dex, 102 Int. How are you equipping items? Let's head over to PoB and find out. So just import this as a new build. No warning. That's because of Supreme Ostentation. You ignore attribute requirements, but you gain no inherent bonuses from attributes. So you gain no life or melee damage from strength. You gain no accuracy or evasion from dexterity. And you gain no mana or energy shield from intelligence. Luckily, if you don't have those attributes to begin with, losing their inherent bonuses doesn't really matter. And this also means that sometimes you get fun nodes like this, increased effective non-curse auras. Really powerful. Absolutely worth it. So what are we tattooing? Unlike Tornado Shot, that had one thing it wanted a lot of, projectile speed, Poison SRS doesn't need a specific thing, so you can use tattoos to cover any inherent weaknesses in your build. Say by tattooing Honored Tattoo of the Oak and getting a bunch of life. This will help you feel much tankier and increase your defenses. Or you can put on a Loyalty Tattoo of Kiloava, which triggers whenever you block. And when you block an enemy, oh boy, that recovery is going to feel incredible. You might not have an Aegis Aurora equipped, but you'll feel like it, which is why the Surrender is a much more viable option than it's been in previous leagues. Coming down here and around, we've got a bunch of similar things. We've also got Chance to Block. This way you don't have to fully invest nearly as much into things like the shield nodes, and a little bit of extra elemental resistances because you might as well cap your res. Plus, you get to do cool stuff like this. The Green Nightmare says that passives granting cold or all elemental resistance also grant spell suppression. So if you replace all of your passives in radius with cold res or all Ellie res, you get a bunch of suppression. I kind of wonder if there's any way to get this just slightly higher. It's a great way to get suppressed though without having to wear suppress gear. As you can see here, suppress here, no suppress here though. Oh, no suppress here either. We're just cruising through, pretty much suppress capped on a Necromancer, something that, while doable before, required significant investment and kind of pigeonholed you into making a lot of sacrifices on your gear. So this is another really, really cool combo. Personally, I think I might have placed this in a slightly different location, just because I'm pretty sure if you nuke the passives here, it's slightly less detrimental than nuking the passives here, at least most of the time, unless, and this is the important part, unless I have nodes like Superiority, which explains why it was placed here, because you've got Superiority. Now, if you place it over here, I'm pretty sure you'll lose the life and reduction around Tireless, but you get to keep everything else. Let's try it. Oh, it doesn't even nuke it. Okay, so if you don't have any good notables, this is absolutely where you want to put it, because you can then take Supreme Ostentation, costs you 1 extra point, but it allows you to keep a bunch of extra nodes, and you can tattoo all these up. And you'd naturally want to drop a Firewalker, so the 2 points are made up for like that. In fact, that is 1 point more efficient. Again, whether you do that or not, it comes down to what notables you end up with. It could be worth it, and in some cases, I actually think going over here, getting 24% aura effect, definitely better. In other cases, coming over here, sacrificing less points is the choice. You'll have to decide that for your own builds based on your own budget. But how do you get Supreme Ostentation? It's an elegant hubris with coins to commemorate Caspero. So look for Caspero. Yes, the general is super important here. The number doesn't matter. All the number does is that's the seed to convert these specific notables. All these notables will do nothing. If you try to tattoo them, they will still do nothing, because that's what happens. It's the price of glory. So that's a really cool thing, and it's led to this interesting evolution in Poison SRS builds. You have the Ashes of the Stars, the super high-end option. You have the Shield, where you get flat life when you block. This is roughly equivalent to 10% of life recovered on block, which is really darn powerful. With the tattoo, the loyalty tattoo, you get another like 20% of life on block. So your unblock healing is absolutely out of this world. You have more leeway on gear while still relatively easily catching up on your suppress. You can fit in all the abyssal sockets. Your minions have resists, so they're all happy. Get to use Severed in Sleep. A Monomu's Gaze for damage, in this case a nice shiny one. Good old minion cluster, all the stuff we know and love, but the really cool tech is number 1, the Kadiro for Supreme Ostentation, and number 2, the Green Nightmare. It is a little bit difficult to search for these, but if you look for Elegant Hubris and then you import a build into POB, if they've got Caspro and if they're putting this over a keystone, you can relatively safely assume that yes, they are using Supreme Ostentation. Another tip-off is the attributes will look really weird, but it's not the easiest to find. Like the list doesn't display, and if I click in, let's say here, are they using it? I mean, you can't tell, right? Oh, Victaria. They're definitely not. But what about this? 6297, that's looking pretty good. Caspro, here we go. Here's someone using one. Let's see, who doesn't look like an Aurabot? Oh, this isn't an Aurabot. Caspro, yep, this is another really cool setup. Using Sandstorm, Hex Blast. Are we trapping or mining? Yes, we are. A Pathfinder. Is it a Poison Pathfinder setup? Nope. Non-poison Hex Blast Mine Pathfinder. Using Warrior's Tail, Impossible Escape, Blood Notch, all the cool stuff. This is just all the cool tech that I've talked about for earlier builds, but combined into one place. See, we've got a Thread of Hope, allocating stuff like Throat Seeker and Arcane Sanctuary, Supreme Ostentation, and we're grabbing the extra notables, so we don't have to take travel nodes and waste time with that. Nope, we just get the good part. You could even get Gleaming Legion if you used armor. That's insane. Plus, I bet this was super cheap, because who uses this? Who uses the Impossible Escape? Well, obviously, around Hexmaster with Elegant Hubris, it's really good. Without it, not particularly valuable. Getting Whispers of Doom that way, that's a really, really cool tech. And the Warrior's Tail is right over here around Charisma, so that we're getting a bunch of chance to suppress. And a little reservation. But in terms of relative value, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12%, and then 2%. 12% suppress, 2% RMR, that's the jewel. Is it absolutely necessary? Well, I'd be surprised if it wasn't, given the level of min-max elsewhere. It's really cool, and we've even got some life, all sorts of fun stuff, completely enabled by tattoos, because you can tattoo the entire trait. I would imagine that these two nodes are only not tattooed by mistake, or because POB just couldn't actually figure out anything. You could easily put in like 2% or 4% chaos res, 2% life, something here, and add just that little bit of extra spice. Yeah, it's a really cool tech, and something that may not be sticking around, so use it now, use it a lot, make a fun build. And then last up, the other thing I wanted to talk about is an Utala's build. So Utala's Hunger is a new item that says plus 800 to 1,000 maximum life if there are no life modifiers on your other equipped items. Life modifiers include plus to maximum life, percent increased maximum life, life regeneration rate. Even the strength grants no inherent life bonus, that's a life modifier. Anything that has the life tag does not work with this chest piece, which limits your gearing. This also means you'll have a pretty darn decent life pool with no life on gear, allowing you to do things like this. and get a bunch of energy shield and minion damage, which you probably wouldn't have been able to if you needed to leave an open prefix for life. Do something like this. It's notoriously difficult to get an amulet like this with good prefixes. Like 70-80 life, those things are super expensive. And now you just don't need it. Uniques. There's plenty of unique items like synthesized rings, the circles, guilt, nostalgia, etc. Great for damage. They have no life on them. And now that doesn't matter. Boots. Think of how easy and cheap these would have been to get. Perfect suffixes. Someone made this with ROG, said, oh, no life, garbage item. Haha, not garbage item. Easy sale. Stygian Vise, Flask Effect Duration, tons of res? Absolutely. Gloves with more armor than you'd ever need, almost perfect suffixes, and a Forbidden Shaco for Corrupting Cry. Because yes, this is a Corrupting Cry build, something pretty neat, where you cast General's Cry, everything gets a bunch of Corrupting Fever stacks, the illusions go out and hit stuff further, and there you go. You get to scale a bunch of things that you wouldn't otherwise, and the Utala's chest is a perfect fit here. And just as a note, I haven't really looked into Corrupting Cry builds. I don't know if this is the best way to play it or the optimal way. It's definitely a cool way, but the coolest part that I really wanted to highlight here was the use of the Utala's Hunger chest. And as you'll see here, this is not the only way to do it. There's also quite a few people playing a Spark Ranger build. Something like this, where you're using Utala. This lets you use double Nebulous for all the damage. Probably not a super tanky build, but it's definitely a lot tankier than it would be if you couldn't use Utala's Hunger. Because with all the unique items that you have to wear, you are not getting a lot of life on this build. I mean, come on, this build has 2 rare items equipped. You are definitely paying the unique tax, but also this is like half of a build's damage, so you're killing everything anyway. Yeah, really cool tech, something that's pretty neat to see. And hopefully, even if Trial of the Ancestors and the tattoos don't go core because they're too strong, I hope this item sticks around because it makes for interesting build crafting. And so those are some of the ways in which players are adapting passive skill tree tattoos into their build making in Trial of the Ancestors. Personally, I think it's very cool that Tornado Shot is more budget than it's ever been because you get +3 projectile from your tree using the Warrior's Tail. I also think it's really cool that you get to do things like use Supreme Ostentation, ignore attribute requirements, and tattoo up your entire tree. This is opening up build options that people didn't have before, while also making existing builds, like Poison SRS, just that much better. And last but not least, the Utala's chest is really neat. So I think we're going to see a lot of build making around it, and I hope it sticks around in future leagues, even if Trial of the Ancestors doesn't necessarily stay with us. Though, given how much creativity in build making Trial of the Ancestors opens up, I'd be perfectly happy with seeing a slightly nerfed version sticking around. Yes, the tattoos are probably too strong as is, but you can adjust the values, tweak things here and there, and it should be pretty darn good. Or at least that's just my opinion. But what about yours? What do you think the coolest tattoo tech you've seen is, and do you have any examples? Be sure to leave them down in the comments below. If you prefer reading to watching, there's going to be a news post similar to this over at MaxwellGG, and I'll even have some spicy info about the recent farming strategies Milky's been doing, including some of the best and some of his favorites. Links to all of those things will be up in the card, down in the description, and over at MaxwellGG. But with that said, thanks for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. If you want to support, link is down in the description, or you can buy PoE MTX using my Nexus link, nexusgg/TENKIEI, which is also down below. That said, hope you learned something, and I'll see you again in about a week for the final meta report from Path of Exile Trial of the Ancestors.